Commander Vexthera's forearms moved across her command console with practiced efficiency, her chitinous fingers dancing over holographic displays that painted her bridge in soft blue light. The GDC sovereignty hung in the void between two dying stars, its massive bulk casting shadows across the asteroid field that had once been the Kepler mining colony. 3 weeks ago, this system had housed over 40 million souls. Now it was nothing but debris and silence. Signal detected on long-range sensors, reported Lieutenant Kralvex from the communications station. His reptilian head turned toward her, yellow eyes reflecting the ambient light. It's human. The word sent a ripple of unease through the bridge crew. Humans. The newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, barely 50 years out of their home system. Most galactic civilizations had dismissed them as another primitive race that would either destroy itself or fade into obscurity within a few centuries. Their technology was crude, their ships barely holding together, and their understanding of galactic politics was laughably naive. Yet here they were, in a system that had just been sterilized by the hegemony. "Display the message," Vexthera commanded, her mandibles clicking with curiosity. The main viewscreen flickered to life, revealing a face that made several crew members recoil. Humans were unsettling to look at, a soft pink skin instead of proper scales or chitin, strange patches of hair growing from their heads, and those disturbing forward-facing eyes that spoke of predator evolution. This particular human appeared to be male, with graying hair and a face marked by what their species called scars. "This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Earth Defense Fleet vessel Indomitable," the human said, his voice carrying a weight that surprised Vexthera. "We've detected GDC vessels in this system. We're requesting immediate tactical briefing and coordination protocols." The bridge fell silent. Coordination protocols? The humans wanted to work together? Against the hegemony? Lieutenant Mordak, her tactical officer, let out a harsh laugh. "Commander, surely they don't mean to fight." The hegemony fleet that hit this system numbered over 200 vessels. Dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, fighter wings. It was a complete extermination force. Vexthera studied the human's face on the screen. There was something in those strange blue eyes that gave her pause. Not fear, she knew what fear looked like across dozens of species. Not desperation either. Something else. Something that made her thorax tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "Open a channel," she ordered. The human's face turned toward her, and she watched his expression change slightly. Most species had difficulty reading human emotions, but she had made a study of them during her years in the Corps. Surprise, followed by what might have been respect. "I am Commander Vexthera of the Galactic Defense Corps," she said formally. "Admiral Chen, you are aware that this system was recently sterilized by hegemony forces? There is nothing left to defend here." The human's mouth curved upward in what she recognized as a smile, though it held no warmth. "Commander, with respect, that's where you're wrong. We're not here to defend the system. We're here to make sure the hegemony pays for what they did." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Make them pay? The hegemony was the most powerful military force in known space. They commanded fleets that could crack planets, armies that had conquered entire sectors. No one made the hegemony pay for anything. "Admiral," Vexthera said carefully, "perhaps you're not aware of the tactical situation. The hegemony force that attacked this system included 12 dreadnoughts and over 50 support vessels. Our combined fleets number perhaps 30 ships, most of them destroyers and cruisers. The mathematics of engagement are unfavorable." The human smile widened, and now it was definitely disturbing. "Commander, has anyone ever told you about human mathematics?" Before she could respond, her sensor officer spoke up. "Commander, we're detecting additional contacts. Multiple signatures dropping out of hyperspace." The tactical display updated, showing new contacts appearing throughout the system. Vexthera's compound eyes widened as she processed the information. Ships. Dozens of them. But not just any ships, these were clearly human vessels, and they were unlike anything she had seen before. The human ships were smaller than traditional galactic designs, but they moved with an aggressiveness that was immediately apparent. Where most civilized species built their vessels for defense and endurance, these human craft seemed designed for one purpose: inflicting damage. They bristled with weapons that jutted out at odd angles, their hulls scarred and patched like warriors who had survived too many battles. "Admiral," she said slowly, "exactly how many ships do you have?" "Enough," the human replied. "Commander Vexthera, I'm going to share something with you that most galactic species don't understand about humanity. We don't fight wars to win. We fight wars to finish them. There's a difference." The sensor readings were becoming clearer now, and what Vexthera saw made her question everything she thought she knew about human capabilities. The ships weren't just numerous, they were modified. Heavily modified. Weapons that shouldn't exist on vessels that size, armor configurations that violated standard engineering principles, and power signatures that suggested the humans had found ways to push their reactors far beyond safe operating parameters. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Mordak muttered, studying his tactical readouts. "Commander, their power-to-mass ratios are completely wrong. Those ships should have torn themselves apart the moment they entered hyperspace. Unless," Vexthera said quietly, a terrible understanding beginning to dawn, "they don't care about safety margins." As if hearing her thoughts, Admiral Chen's voice came over the comm again. "Commander, we've detected hegemony reinforcements massing in the next system over. Intelligence suggests they're planning to move on the Centauri colonies next. 12 million civilians, including a significant population of Veltar refugees from the Outer Rim conflicts." Vexthera knew about Centauri. It was a peaceful system, mostly agricultural worlds with minimal defenses. If the hegemony hit it with the same force they had used here, it would be another massacre. "The GDC has protocols for civilian evacuation," she said. "We can begin moving transports." "No time," the human interrupted. "Our intelligence says they move in 18 hours. But, here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to hit their staging area first." The bridge erupted in shocked chittering and hisses. Attack a hegemony staging area? It would be suicide. The hegemony didn't just build their fleet concentrations, they fortified them. Orbital platforms, defensive networks, fighter patrols. It would be like throwing themselves into a meat grinder. "Admiral Chen," Vexthera said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "you're suggesting a preemptive strike against a force that outnumbers us at least 3-1, in a fortified position, with no support from GDC High Command?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. It's impossible. The losses would be total. Complete annihilation." The human was quiet for a moment, and, when he spoke again, his voice carried something that made every sensor on her skin tingle with primitive warning signals. "Commander, let me ask you something. How many worlds has the hegemony sterilized in the past year?" 17 confirmed, possibly more in outer sectors. "How many civilians?" Estimates range from 800 million to over 1 billion. "And how many times has the galactic community responded with anything more than strongly worded diplomatic protests?" The question hung in the air like a blade. The answer, and everyone on the bridge knew it, was 0. Never. The hegemony was too powerful, too entrenched. The most the galactic community ever did was evacuate whoever they could and file formal complaints that were ignored. "Admiral," Vexthera said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we stop letting them choose when and where to commit genocide," Chen replied. "I'm proposing we make them afraid for once. I'm proposing we show them what happens when you pick a fight with a species that evolved on a death world." The phrase death world made several crew members flinch. It was a classification reserved for planets so hostile that sapient life should never have been able to develop there. Worlds with extreme weather, predatory ecosystems, geological instability. Most civilized species evolved on what were classified as garden worlds, stable, peaceful environments that encouraged cooperation and careful resource management. Earth, according to the surveys, was definitely a death world. High gravity, violent weather patterns, tectonic activity, and an ecosystem where literally everything was trying to kill everything else. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived there had been considered an interesting anomaly by xenobiologists. Now, looking at the tactical display showing dozens of human ships positioned with mathematical precision throughout the system, Vexthera was beginning to understand that it might be much more than an anomaly. "Commander," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving tactical data streams from the human vessels. They're sharing targeting information, fleet positions, even their attack plans." This was unprecedented. Most species guarded their military intelligence jealously, sharing only the minimum necessary for coordination. The humans were broadcasting everything: their strengths, their weaknesses, their exact capabilities. Why would they do that? Lieutenant Kralvex asked, puzzled. "Because," Vexthera said, a chill running down her spine as understanding dawned, "they're not worried about us learning their secrets. They're worried about us not being able to keep up." The tactical display updated again as human ships moved into formation. But it wasn't any formation she recognized from military doctrine. It was aggressive, unorthodox, and designed around a principle that no civilized military would ever consider: acceptable losses approaching 100%. "Admiral Chen," she said, her voice barely steady, "your formation analysis suggests you're expecting catastrophic casualties. Possibly total fleet loss." "Possibly," the human agreed calmly. "But here's the thing, Commander. They're expecting us to run. They're expecting us to follow standard galactic engagement protocols: probe, assess, withdraw, report, request reinforcements, debate in committees for 6 months while they kill another billion civilians." He paused, and, when he continued, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "They're not expecting us to ram a dreadnought at full speed with a ship full of antimatter. They're not expecting us to target their command vessels first, even if it means flying through a wall of plasma fire. They're not expecting us to fight like humans." The implications of what he was saying hit Vexthera like a physical blow. The humans weren't just proposing a military engagement. They were proposing total warfare. The kind of warfare that civilized species had evolved beyond millennia ago, when they learned that survival meant cooperation and measured response. But humans, she was beginning to realize, hadn't evolved beyond anything. They had simply learned to control it. "Commander," Admiral Chen continued, "you have a choice. You can withdraw your forces and file your report, and in 18 hours the hegemony will sterilize Centauri just like they sterilized the system. Or you can stay and help us show them that genocide has consequences." Vexthera looked around her bridge at faces that mirrored her own confusion and growing terror. This wasn't how civilized species fought wars. This wasn't how rational beings approached conflict. This was something else entirely. Something that might actually work. "All vessels," she heard herself saying, "prepare for combat operations. Signal the human fleet that will coordinate under their tactical command." The bridge erupted in shocked protests from her officers, but she silenced them with a gesture. As she watched the human ships begin their inexorable advance toward the hyperspace jump point, she wondered if she had just made the best decision of her military career. Or if she had just learned what it meant to fight alongside monsters. The hyperspace transition hit Vexthera's ship like a hammer blow, even with the best inertial dampeners GDC technology could provide. Around her, the bridge crew struggled to maintain their stations as the Sovereignty dropped back into normal space in the Thanatos system. What she saw on the main view screen made her question everything she thought she knew about military strategy. The hegemony staging area was exactly as their intelligence had described, and worse. 12 dreadnoughts hung in formation around the system's primary gas giant, each one a kilometer of death and destruction that could crack a moon. Support vessels swarmed around them like insects: battle cruisers, destroyers, fighter carriers, supply ships. The whole formation was protected by a network of orbital defense platforms that bristled with enough firepower to sterilize a small planet. It was a force designed to be absolutely overwhelming. Unstoppable. A statement of power that said the hegemony could deploy devastating force anywhere in the galaxy with impunity. And the humans were charging straight at it. "By the ancestors," Lieutenant Mordak whispered, his scales shifting to stress colors as he processed the tactical display. "Commander, the human vessels aren't following any recognizable attack pattern. They're just advancing." Vexthera watched in fascination and horror as the human ships moved toward the hegemony fleet in what appeared to be complete disorder. No formation flying, no coordinated approach patterns, no attempt at tactical surprise. Just dozens of small, scarred vessels burning at maximum acceleration directly toward the largest military force she had ever seen. "Admiral Chen," she called over the calm, "your attack vector is unconventional. Are you attempting to draw their fire while we flank?" The human's voice came back immediately, calm and focused. "Negative, Commander. We're not drawing fire. We're going right through the middle of them." Through the middle. Vexthera's compound eyes focused on the tactical display, trying to understand what she was seeing. The human ships weren't spreading out to minimize damage or attempting to use the gas giant's gravity well for tactical advantage. They were condensing into a tight formation aimed directly at the heart of the hegemony fleet. "Admiral, that's suicide. The crossfire from the dreadnoughts alone will destroy most of us." "Yes," Chen interrupted. "But not all of us. And the ones who make it through are going to hit their command vessel with everything we've got." Vexthera felt her thorax constrict as the full implications hit her. The humans weren't trying to win a battle in any traditional sense. They were conducting what military theorists called a decapitation strike, an attempt to destroy enemy command and control regardless of the cost to their own forces. But no one actually did decapitation strikes. The mathematics were horrific. You could expect to lose 90% or more of your attacking force, and success wasn't guaranteed even then. It was theoretical doctrine, discussed in war colleges as an option of absolute last resort. The humans were treating it as standard operating procedure. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Chen," the comm crackled. "Remember, we're not here to survive. We're here to send a message. Make every shot count." The response from the human fleet was immediate and unified. "Understood, Admiral. See you in hell." Vexthera had heard the phrase before in human communications, but she had never really understood it until now. Hell, according to human mythology, was a place of eternal punishment and suffering. They were literally telling each other they expected to die and would meet in the afterlife. And they sounded cheerful about it. "Commander," her communications officer reported, "the hegemony fleet is hailing us. They're demanding we withdraw immediately or face immediate destruction." "Put them through," Vexthera ordered. The viewscreen flickered, replacing the image of the advancing human fleet with the visage of Supreme Admiral Kethvar, the hegemony's most successful fleet commander. His 6 eyes glared down at her with the kind of cold contempt reserved for inferior species who had forgotten their place. "GDC vessel," his voice boomed, "you will reverse course immediately and withdraw from this system. This is a hegemony military operation. Interference will be met with total destruction." Vexthera found herself looking past the Supreme Admiral's image to the tactical display, where dozens of human ships continued their impossible charge toward certain death. Something about their absolute commitment made her stand straighter, her mandibles clicking with a decision that surprised her. "Supreme Admiral Kethvar," she said formally, "the Galactic Defense Corps rejects your demand. We are here under mutual defense protocols with our human allies." The hegemony commander's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement if it weren't so cold. "Human allies? Commander, you're protecting a species that barely knows how to build proper starships. This is your last warning." "Actually," Vexthera said, watching the humans close to weapons range, "I think it's yours." The first human ship to enter the hegemony's engagement zone was a destroyer called Relentless. Vexthera watched as every weapon on 3 dreadnoughts turned toward it, space lighting up with plasma fire and particle beams that should have vaporized the small vessel instantly. The Relentless flew through the barrage like it was a light rain. "Impossible," Lieutenant Mordak breathed. Nothing that small should be able to survive that kind of concentrated fire. But, even as he spoke, Vexthera could see why the ship was still flying. The human vessel was spinning, rolling, juking in patterns that seemed random but must have been calculated to exploit gaps in the enemy targeting systems. More than that, parts of the ship were coming off armor plating, secondary systems, even whole sections, but the core vessel kept flying. They had built their ships to be destroyed. Piece by piece, if necessary, but still keep fighting. "Admiral," she called to Chen, "your ships are taking massive damage. Acceptable losses, came the reply, and she could hear weapons fire in the background of his transmission. We expected this. Keep watching. The second wave of human ships entered the engagement zone, and now Vexthera began to understand what she was seeing. The first ships, vessels like the Relentless, weren't really trying to survive. They were drawing fire, forcing the hegemony gunners to reveal their positions and firing patterns. Every hit they took, every piece of debris that spun away into space, was data that the following ships could use. The humans were learning how to fight the hegemony by dying. Commander, her sensor officer called out, I'm reading massive power fluctuations from the human vessels. Their reactors are operating at levels that should cause immediate containment failure. Vexthera watched a human cruiser called Defiant take a direct hit from a dreadnought's main battery. The blast should have vaporized the ship completely. Instead, the cruiser's rear section simply ceased to exist, but the forward section kept flying. Kept firing. Even as its hull glowed white-hot from radiation exposure, its remaining weapons continued to target hegemony vessels. They're not just accepting catastrophic damage, she realized aloud. They're planning for it. The human ships were getting closer now, and the hegemony was beginning to react with something that might have been concern. The defensive platforms were concentrating their fire, and more fighter squadrons were launching from the carriers. But the humans kept coming. And then, one of them got through. The destroyer Indefatigable, its hull already half melted from plasma fire, suddenly accelerated beyond what should have been possible for a damaged vessel. Vexthera watched in amazement as the small ship shot between two dreadnoughts, rolled to avoid a wall of defensive fire, and slammed directly into the side of the hegemony flagship. The explosion was visible across the entire system. When the glare faded, both ships were gone, but so was the hegemony's primary command vessel. Primary target eliminated, came Admiral Chen's voice, now clearly broadcasting from a backup ship. All vessels, continue the attack. Make them remember this day. The effect on the hegemony fleet was immediate and dramatic. Without their flagship's command and control systems, the massive formation began to lose cohesion. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly found themselves blocking each other's fire lines, defensive grids developed gaps, and the disciplined wall of fire that had seemed so overwhelming began to falter. The humans pressed their advantage with a ferocity that made Vexthera's trained military mind recoil. They weren't trying to capture ships or force surrenders. They weren't following rules of engagement or attempting to minimize collateral damage. They were simply trying to destroy as much as possible before they died. Commander, Lieutenant Kralvex reported, human vessel Vengeance is on collision course with the second command dreadnought. They're not responding to our hails. Vexthera looked at the tactical display and saw a human heavy cruiser, most of its weapons destroyed and its hull breached in dozens of places, burning straight toward one of the massive hegemony vessels. As she watched, she realized the human ship wasn't just trying to ram the dreadnought. It was trying to ram it in exactly the right place to cause a reactor breach. By all the gods, she whispered. They're not just sacrificing themselves. They're turning their ships into precision weapons. The Vengeance hit the dreadnought's engineering section with mathematical precision. The resulting explosion took out not just both vessels, but 3 nearby destroyers and a supply ship that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The hegemony fleet was beginning to break. All GDC vessels, Vexthera found herself ordering, advance and engage. Target their support ships. Her own fleet moved forward, but, compared to the human assault, it felt almost sedate. GDC vessels fired carefully aimed salvos, targeted specific systems, attempted to disable rather than destroy. It was civilized warfare, conducted according to established rules and conventions. The humans were conducting something else entirely. She watched a human frigate called Audacious, already missing half its hull, deliberately ram a hegemony fighter carrier. The collision shouldn't have been enough to destroy the much larger vessel, but, as the carrier exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, Vexthera realized the frigate must have overloaded its reactor at the moment of impact. They weren't just willing to die. They were weaponizing their deaths. Commander, her tactical officer reported, his voice shaky, the hegemony fleet is beginning to withdraw. They're falling back to the outer system. Vexthera stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The hegemony was retreating. The most powerful military force in known space was running away from a fleet of primitive human ships that were more than half destroyed. "Admiral Chen," she called over the comm, "they're withdrawing. Do we pursue?" There was a long pause before the human responded, and, when he did, his voice was tired but grimly satisfied. "Negative, Commander. We've made our point. Let them go." As the surviving hegemony vessels limped away toward the hyperspace jump point, Vexthera took stock of the battlefield. Of the 73 human ships that had entered the system, only 19 were still functional. The space around them was filled with debris from both sides, and the local star's light glinted off thousands of pieces of metal that had once been warships. The humans had lost over 70% of their fleet. And they were acting like they had won a great victory. "Admiral," she said carefully, "your casualties are significant." "Expected," Chen replied. "Commander, every ship that died here bought time for 12 million civilians in the Centauri system. That's acceptable mathematics." Acceptable mathematics. Vexthera found herself trying to process the concept. In galactic military doctrine, acceptable casualties were usually calculated in the low single digits. 5% losses were considered heavy. 10% was catastrophic. The humans had just lost 3/4 of their force and were calling it a success. "Admiral," she said slowly, "how do your people process loss on this scale?" The human was quiet for a moment, and, when he answered, his voice carried something that made her compound eyes water. "Commander, every human who died here did so to protect people they'll never meet. That's not loss. That's purpose." As the surviving human ships began search and rescue operations for any crew members who might have survived in the debris field, Vexthera found herself watching them with a growing sense of unease. She had fought alongside dozens of species in her career. She understood Veltar honor codes, Krek's tactical doctrine, even the bizarre mathematical warfare preferred by the synthetics. But she was beginning to realize she didn't understand humans at all. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. They treated catastrophic casualties as strategic advantages. They turned their deaths into weapons. And, most disturbing of all, it was working. The hegemony had controlled this sector through fear and overwhelming force for centuries. No one had ever seriously challenged them because the cost was simply too high. But the humans had just proved that some costs were worth paying. The question that kept echoing in her mind as they began the journey back to friendly space was simple and terrifying. If this was how humans fought when they were trying to protect strangers, what would they do when someone threatened their home? The emergency session of the Galactic Defense Corps High Command took place on the neutral station Harmony, a massive structure that orbited the dead star at the center of the galaxy. Vexthera stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species, her formal report glowing in holographic displays around the amphitheater. The numbers were stark, undeniable, and deeply disturbing. The human fleet achieved total tactical success, she concluded, her mandibles clicking nervously as she addressed the council. The hegemony staging area was completely disrupted, their command structure crippled, and their planned assault on Centauri was delayed indefinitely. Supreme Counselor Thranks, an ancient Veltar whose scales had turned silver with age, leaned forward on his speaking platform. "At what cost, Commander?" Human casualties were 74%. Fleet operational capacity was reduced by over 80%. By any conventional analysis, their losses were catastrophic. And, yet, Counselor Meridian of the Crystal Collective chimed in, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns. "You describe this as a success?" Vexthera felt the weight of 47 pairs of eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, focused on her. These were the most powerful beings in known space, representatives of civilizations that had mastered the stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. And she was about to tell them something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. "Yes, counselors. I believe it was a complete success. Not despite their casualties, but because of how they used them." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic resonances that served as expressions of disbelief across the various species. Counselor Vorthak of the hegemony, yes, they had a representative here even now, slammed his 6 arms against his podium.
Madness, the hegemony representative roared.
No rational species sacrifices 3/4 of their military assets for a single engagement.
It violates every principle of strategic warfare.
Vexthera turned to face the hegemony counselor, and, for the first time since the battle, she allowed herself a small smile. Counselor Vorthak, with respect, you're thinking about this wrong.
The humans didn't sacrifice 3/4 of their fleet. They invested it. Invested?
Supreme Counselor Thranks asked, his tone suggesting he found the concept distasteful.
Yes.
Every human ship that died transmitted tactical data back to their command networks. Every engagement provided intelligence about hegemony weapon systems, defensive capabilities, and command structures. Every sacrifice taught them how to fight more effectively. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show the communications intercepts her ships had recorded during the battle.
Listen to this transmission from the human destroyer Relentless, recorded just before it was destroyed.
The recording played in the original human language, followed by a translation. Dreadnought plasma cannons have a 2.3-second recharge cycle.
Gap in firing pattern at Mark 77 Alpha.
Transmitting targeting solution to all ships.
Make them count. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
The human crew had used their dying moments not to call for help or express fear, but to provide tactical intelligence that would help their comrades kill the enemy more efficiently. They learned how to destroy us by letting us destroy them, Counselor Vorthak said quietly, and, for the first time since she had known him, he sounded uncertain.
Precisely, Vexthera confirmed. And, there's more.
Our intelligence indicates that every major human population center received complete tactical briefings from the Thanatos engagement within 6 hours of the battle's conclusion. Ship design flaws, weapon vulnerabilities, defensive gaps, all of it has been disseminated throughout their entire military infrastructure.
Counselor Zephyr of the Aerial Republics raised a wing. Commander, you're suggesting that this one engagement has compromised hegemony military security across their entire fleet structure? I'm not suggesting it, Counselor. I'm stating it as fact.
The enormity of what she was describing began to ripple through the chamber. The hegemony's military dominance was based on their technological superiority and the galaxy's fear of their overwhelming firepower.
But, if humanity could find ways to neutralize that advantage.
This cannot be allowed to continue, Counselor Vorthak declared, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had intimidated galactic councils for decades.
The humans must be brought under control. Their reckless tactics threaten the stability of established military doctrine. Whose stability?
The voice came from the chamber's entrance, where a new figure had appeared. Admiral Chen walked into the amphitheater with the measured pace of someone who belonged there, despite the fact that humanity had only been granted observer status in the GDC 3 months earlier.
The human looked tired, Vexthera noted.
His uniform was crisp but his face showed the strain of commanding a fleet through impossible odds. More importantly, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. Admiral Chen, Supreme Counselor Thranks said carefully, you were not invited to this session.
No, Chen agreed, taking a position at the center of the amphitheater floor. But, I think you need to hear what I have to say.
He activated a personal holoprojector, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with images that made several counselors recoil.
Burned worlds. Empty orbital platforms.
The debris fields that marked where entire civilizations had once thrived. 17 systems sterilized in the past year, Chen said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics.
Over 1 billion sentients dead. And, what has the galactic community done about it? The silence was damning. You filed protests. You've imposed economic sanctions that the hegemony ignores.
You've held emergency sessions where you debate appropriate responses while more worlds burn.
Chen's gaze swept across the assembled counselors. You've done everything except actually fight back.
Counselor Vorthak stood, his 6 arms spread in what Vexthera recognized as a threat display.
Human, you forget yourself.
The galaxy has maintained peace for over 3,000 years through careful diplomacy and measured responses. Your species' violent tendencies may be acceptable on your primitive world, but they have no place in civilized space. Chen turned to face the hegemony representative, and Vexthera felt her thorax tighten as she saw the expression on the human's face. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder. More calculating. Counselor, how many of your own people died at Thanatos? The question caught Vorthak off guard. What? Simple question. Your forces controlled that system. They had overwhelming superiority. When my ships attacked, how many hegemony personnel were lost? Vorthak's mandibles clicked with irritation. The specific casualty figures are classified military information. Over 30,000, Chen said quietly. 12 ships destroyed, 23 damaged beyond repair. Your most advanced dreadnought was completely vaporized when we rammed it with a ship that cost us less to build than one of your fighter craft. The numbers hit the chamber like physical blows. 30,000 casualties was more than the hegemony had suffered in the previous 50 years combined. And here's what's really interesting, Chen continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. Our intelligence networks indicate that news of those casualties has already reached every hegemony military installation in this sector. Your commanders are asking questions they've never had to ask before. Like whether their technological superiority is worth anything against an enemy that's willing to die to take them down. Supreme Counselor Thranks leaned back in his chair, clearly disturbed by the implications. Admiral, surely you're not suggesting that a few tactical victories can challenge an empire that spans hundreds of systems. I'm not suggesting anything, Counselor. I'm telling you what's already happening. Chen gestured, and new images filled the chamber. Star maps showing hegemony fleet movements, intelligence reports, intercepted communications. Since Thanatos, the hegemony has pulled back their forward fleets from 7 systems. They've increased patrols in their core territories. They've started building defensive installations around assets that they've never bothered to protect before. His smile was cold and satisfied. They're acting like they're afraid. Impossible, Vorthak sputtered. The hegemony fears no one. Really? Chen turned back to the alien. Then, why have you postponed 3 planned expansion operations in the past month? Why are your military commanders requesting reinforcements for raids that used to be handled by single squadrons? Why is your high command issuing new protocols for engagement with human vessels? The chamber was absolutely silent now. Every counselor was staring at Vorthak, waiting for his response. When it came, his voice was barely controlled. You have no idea what you're unleashing, human. The hegemony has shown restraint, but that restraint has limits. Push us too far, and we will not just sterilize your military assets. We will crack your home world like an egg. The threat hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. This was exactly what the galactic community had always feared: escalation beyond control. The kind of threat that had kept the peace for millennia through careful accommodation and measured responses. Chen looked at the hegemony representative for a long moment, and, when he spoke, every being in the chamber felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. Counselor Vorthak, I want you to imagine something for me. I want you to imagine what happens to your species when Earth stops sending diplomatic messages and starts sending ships. He gestured again, and the display shifted to show images that made Vexthera's compound eyes widen. Earth's orbital shipyards, but not as she had seen them before. These images showed construction facilities that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, assembly lines producing vessels at a rate that seemed impossible. You see, the ships we brought to Thanatos? Those weren't our military fleet. Those were our exploration vessels. Research ships. Colony transports. We converted them to warships because we needed to respond quickly to your atrocities. The implications of what he was saying began to penetrate the shocked silence of the chamber. Our actual military shipyards have been running at full capacity since the day we learned about what you did to the Kepler colonies. We've been building ships designed specifically to fight the hegemony. Ships that incorporate everything we learned at Thanatos and everything we've learned since. New images flashed across the display. Vessels that looked nothing like the converted ships that had attacked Thanatos. These were purpose-built engines of destruction, designed with the same philosophy that had driven humanity's first interstellar expansion. If something was worth doing, it was worth overdoing.
You want to threaten Earth? Chen asked conversationally. Go ahead. But, understand what that means. It means every human colony, every human outpost, every human ship in the galaxy will receive the same message: the hegemony has declared war on our home world. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. And then, you'll discover something that we've known since before we reached the stars. When you threaten a human's home, you don't just get a fight. You get a war. And we don't fight wars to win territory or negotiate better treaties. Chen turned to address the entire chamber, his voice carrying a finality that made Vexthera think of closing doors and burned bridges. We fight wars to end them. Permanently. The silence that followed was so complete that Vexthera could hear the station's life support systems humming in the background. Every representative was staring at the human, trying to process what they had just heard. Not just a threat, but a promise. A statement of intent that challenged everything they thought they knew about civilized behavior. Finally, Supreme Counselor Thranks found his voice. Admiral Chen, what exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything, Counselor. I'm informing you of a decision that has already been made. Chen turned off his holoprojector and straightened his uniform. The Terran Defense Fleet is going to continue hunting hegemony forces throughout this sector. We're going to make it impossible for them to conduct sterilization campaigns. And we're going to do it using whatever methods we consider necessary. He began walking toward the exit, then paused at the chamber's threshold. The only question for this council is whether you want to help us save lives, or whether you want to keep filing protests while worlds burn. Because either way, we're not stopping. As the human disappeared into the corridor beyond, Vexthera found herself staring at the tactical displays he had left behind. Images of ships designed for no purpose but the systematic destruction of an enemy that had never before faced serious resistance. She thought about the crews of those ships, humans who had volunteered to fight an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. Beings who had looked at the mathematics of warfare and decided that acceptable losses included everything up to and including their own extinction, as long as they could stop the genocide of others. For the first time in her military career, Vexthera found herself wondering which side in this conflict truly frightened her more. The distress signal reached the GDC monitoring station at Epsilon Reticuli at exactly 1427 Standard Galactic Time. What made it remarkable wasn't the call for help, those came in every few hours from ships across the sector. What made it remarkable was who was sending it. This is Supreme Admiral Kethvar of the 3rd Hegemony Battle Fleet. The transmission crackled through layers of static and what sounded like explosions in the background. We are under attack by unknown forces. Request immediate assistance from any available vessels. The communications officer, a young Veltar named Sisktar, stared at the message in disbelief. The hegemony was requesting help. The same hegemony that had spent the last century telling the galaxy that they needed no one's assistance for anything. Commander Vexthera arrived at the monitoring station within minutes of the alert. She had been reviewing intelligence reports about unusual human fleet movements when the message came through, and something about the timing made her compound eyes focus with predatory intensity. Play the full transmission, she ordered. The recording filled the station's command center with sounds that no one had ever expected to hear from a hegemony vessel: panic, desperation, and something that sounded very much like fear. Unknown vessels are using unconventional attack patterns. They're not following any recognizable tactical doctrine. We've lost 6 cruisers and the dreadnought inevitable. Repeat, we have lost the inevitable. These aren't standard engagement protocols. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Commander, Sisktar said quietly, the inevitable was their newest dreadnought. It was supposed to be unsinkable. How could you plot a course for the transmission source? Vexthera interrupted. Maximum speed. Commander, regulations require, now, Lieutenant. As the Sovereignty dropped into hyperspace, Vexthera found herself thinking about the intelligence reports she had been reviewing.
Human fleets had been spotted throughout the sector over the past month, always in small groups, always moving with apparent randomness. The GDC had assumed they were conducting reconnaissance operations or perhaps evacuating their own civilian populations from contested systems.
They had been wrong.
The Sovereignty dropped out of hyperspace into a scene that would haunt Vexthera's dreams for the rest of her life. The Corvin system, which had housed a major hegemony military installation just 6 hours earlier, was now a debris field that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers. But it wasn't the destruction that made her stare in horror at the tactical displays. It was the systematic nature of it. "Commander," her sensor officer reported, his voice shaking, "I'm detecting the remains of everything. The military station, the orbital platforms, the supply depots, even the civilian infrastructure.
It's all been completely destroyed."
Vexthera studied the readings, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This wasn't the result of a traditional space battle. There were no signs of the massive energy discharges that marked dreadnought engagements, no debris patterns consistent with fleet actions. Instead, the destruction looked surgical. Precise. As if someone had methodically identified every single hegemony asset in the system and eliminated it with the minimum necessary force.
"Look for survivors," she ordered. "Any vessel, any station, anything that's still transmitting."
It took them 3 hours to find the emergency beacon broadcasting from a damaged hegemony supply ship that had somehow survived hidden in the system's asteroid belt. When they brought the ship aboard, the survivors they found were not what she had expected. Commander Velthak had been a hegemony officer for 30 years. His service record showed participation in dozens of conquest campaigns, including 3 system sterilizations. He was a veteran warrior from a species that had evolved on a high-gravity world, bred for aggression and trained for total warfare. Now he sat in the Sovereignty's medical bay, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare that medics across the galaxy recognized as severe psychological trauma.
"Commander Velthak," Vexthera said gently, "can you tell me what happened here?" The hegemony officer looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They came out of nowhere. Just appeared. No formation, no coordination that we could detect.
Individual ships, spread across the entire system."
"How many vessels?" "We counted 47 initially.
Small ships, most of them. Nothing bigger than a heavy cruiser." Our fleet commander laughed when the tactical reports came in. "We had 2 dreadnoughts, 8 battlecruisers, 3 fighter carriers. We outnumbered them in total mass by more than 4 to 1. Velthak's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that Vexthera recognized as severe stress indicators.
"They didn't attack like any fleet we'd ever faced. No concentrated assaults, no attempt to establish fire superiority. Each ship picked a target and, simply, flew at it. Directly.
Like they were conducting individual suicide runs." "But, you said they were too small to threaten dreadnoughts."
"That's what we thought," Velthak interrupted.
"But, they weren't trying to destroy our ships with weapons. They were using their ships as weapons." He gestured to his medical attendant, who activated a portable holoprojector. The images that appeared made Vexthera's thorax constrict with instinctive revulsion. A human heavy cruiser, most of its hull stripped away by defensive fire, slammed into the side of a hegemony dreadnought at a velocity that should have been impossible for a damaged vessel. But the impact wasn't random. The human ship had hit at exactly the point where the dreadnought's reactor shielding was weakest. "They turned their reactors into bombs," Velthak said numbly.
"Not reactor overloads. Controlled detonations.
They had calculated exactly how much antimatter they needed to breach our hulls, and they delivered it by hand." The recording continued, showing human ships throughout the system conducting what could only be described as precision kamikaze attacks. But these weren't desperate last stands, they were coordinated, calculated strikes designed to maximize damage while minimizing the resources needed to achieve it. "Commander," Vexthera said carefully, "your fleet had standard point defense systems.
How did they penetrate your screening fire?" Velthak's laugh was bitter and broken. "They didn't penetrate it. they absorbed it. Do you understand what that means?
They built their ships specifically to soak up as much damage as possible while still delivering their payloads. Every hit we scored, every system we destroyed, was something they had designed to be expendable. He activated another recording, this one showing a human destroyer that had lost its engines, weapons, most of its hull, and appeared to be flying on momentum alone. As they watched, the crippled vessel used its maneuvering thrusters to adjust course slightly and crashed directly into a hegemony fighter bay. They turned their deaths into an art form, Velthak whispered. Every ship that died took something important with it. And they all died with mathematical precision. Vexthera studied the tactical analysis her computers were generating from the battle recordings. The efficiency was staggering. 47 human ships had destroyed a force more than 4 times their size, and they had done it while losing 100% of their own vessels. It was the worst defeat in hegemony military history. And, according to the tactical patterns she was seeing, it was also completely replicable. How many human ships escaped? She asked.
None, Velthak replied. They didn't try to escape. The last ship in their fleet, a frigate called Retribution, was completely disabled.
No engines, no weapons, life support failing.
Our fighters were closing in to capture it. He paused, and, when he continued, his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect if it weren't so terrified. The frigate's captain came on an open channel. Female voice, very calm. She said, "Thank you for the tactical data. This has been very educational."
Then, she detonated her reactor manually.
The implications hit Vexthera like a physical blow. They were gathering intelligence. The entire battle was a learning exercise.
Every engagement, every casualty, every defensive measure we took, they were recording it all and transmitting it back to their command networks in real time.
They died learning how to kill us more efficiently. Vexthera's mind raced through the possibilities.
If humanity had conducted similar learning exercises across multiple systems, they would now have comprehensive tactical intelligence on hegemony fleet operations, defensive capabilities, and command structures. They would know exactly how to fight the galaxy's most powerful military force. And they had proved they were willing to pay any price to acquire that knowledge. "Commander Velthak," she said slowly, "where was your fleet going when they attacked you?" The hegemony officer's expression became, if possible, even more haunted. "Earth. We were part of the force being assembled for the final solution to the human problem. 200 ships, enough to crack their home world and end their interference permanently." 200 ships? The High Command decided that the humans had become too dangerous to ignore. They were planning to make an example that would discourage other species from following their lead. Vexthera felt her compound eyes dilate as the full scope of what was happening became clear. The hegemony was mobilizing for total war against humanity. And humanity was using that mobilization as an opportunity to study their enemy's capabilities in detail. "How many other fleets were heading for the rendezvous point?" she asked.
7. Maybe 8. I'm not sure how many made it.
"Commander," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving multiple distress signals from across the sector.
Hegemony vessels under attack in at least 6 different systems." Vexthera stared at the tactical display as the reports came in. The pattern was becoming clear now. Humanity hadn't been conducting random raids. They had been systematically hunting every hegemony fleet heading toward their space, learning from each engagement, and perfecting their techniques. "Get me Admiral Chan," she ordered. "Priority channel." The connection came through almost immediately, though the background showed a bridge that was clearly in the middle of combat operations.
"Commander Vexthera," Chen said, his voice calm despite the obvious chaos around him.
"I assume you're calling about recent events. Admiral, what have you done?"
Chen's smile was visible even through the static of the transmission.
"We've been preparing, Commander. The hegemony wanted to teach us a lesson about challenging superior forces. We decided to be good students. You've just declared war on the most powerful empire in the galaxy."
"No," Chen corrected, "they declared war on us when they decided to sterilize Earth."
were just fighting it more efficiently than they expected. New reports were coming in from across the sector.
Hegemony fleets attacked by small groups of human ships that fought with tactics no civilized species had ever seen.
Kamikaze attacks that were somehow more effective than conventional warfare. Human crews that broadcast tactical intelligence even as they died. Admiral Vexthera said desperately, "They're mobilizing their entire military.
Every ship, every station, every asset they have.
You can't possibly fight them all."
"We don't plan to fight them all, Commander." Chen's voice carried a note of finality that made her thorax constrict with dread. "We plan to make them too afraid to use those ships." The transmission ended, leaving Vexthera staring at the tactical displays that showed the hegemony's carefully ordered military machine beginning to tear itself apart as commanders pulled back from forward positions, concentrated in defensive formations, and began treating every shadow as a potential human attack.
Fear. For the first time in centuries, the hegemony was acting out of fear.
And, as she watched the reports continue to stream in, Vexthera realized that Admiral Chen had been right about one thing. When you fought a species that was willing to die to achieve their objectives, conventional military doctrine became not just useless, but counterproductive. The humans had weaponized death itself. And they were just getting started. The emergency summit convened on the neutral world of Concordia, in a chamber that had witnessed the signing of peace treaties that had shaped galactic civilization for thousands of years. Now it hosted a gathering that would determine whether that civilization would survive the next year. Commander Vexthera stood at the center of the vast amphitheater, surrounded by representatives from every major species in known space. Even civilizations that had been enemies for millennia had set aside their differences to address what they now called the human problem. But the real measure of how serious the situation had become was the presence of High Admiral Vortex himself, Supreme Commander of all hegemony forces.
In 3 centuries of galactic politics, a hegemony High Admiral had never attended a multi-species conference.
They had simply issued demands and expected compliance. Now Vortex sat in his delegation section, all 6 of his arms folded in what Vexthera recognized as a defensive posture. More telling was the fact that his usual complement of honor guards had been replaced by what appeared to be his entire personal security detail.
The hegemony was afraid.
"Commander Vexthera," Supreme Counselor Thranks began, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "Your report indicates that human forces have conducted over 40 separate engagements with hegemony fleets in the past month.
Can you confirm these figures?"
"Yes, Counselor.
43 confirmed engagements across 17 systems.
The pattern is consistent in every case, small human forces attacking much larger hegemony formations using unconventional tactics that prioritize maximum damage over survival."
"And the results?"
Vexthera gestured, and holographic displays filled the air above the assembled delegates. The numbers were staggering, almost impossible to believe. In 43 engagements, humanity had lost over 1,500 ships. Every single vessel that entered combat was destroyed or disabled beyond repair. But the hegemony had lost over 4,000 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts. "The mathematical efficiency is unprecedented," she continued, ignoring the shocked silence that had fallen over the chamber. "Human forces are achieving kill ratios approaching 3-to-1 despite being outgunned and outnumbered in every engagement. They're doing it by treating their own ships as expendable delivery systems for precisely calculated amounts of destruction."
Counselor Keth of the Maritime Republics raised a tentacle. "Commander, surely these losses are unsustainable for humanity."
"They must be approaching the limits of their shipbuilding capacity." Before Vexthera could respond, a new voice cut through the chamber from the observers' gallery. Admiral Chen walked down the central aisle with the measured pace of someone who belonged there, despite the fact that humanity still held only observer status in the Galactic Council.
"Actually, Counselor, we're just getting started."
The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop as every delegate turned to stare at the human. Chen looked tired, Vexthera noted, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards in a game where the stakes kept getting higher. "Admiral Chen," Supreme Counselor Thranks said carefully, "you were not invited to address this assembly." "No," Chen agreed, taking a position at the speaker's podium without invitation.
But I think it's time you all understood exactly what you're dealing with.
He activated a personal holoprojector, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with images that made several delegates recoil. Industrial facilities on a scale that dwarfed anything in galactic civilization. Shipyards that stretched across entire continents. Assembly lines that seemed to produce vessels with the same efficiency that most species used for manufacturing consumer goods. "You're all thinking about this wrong," Chen continued conversationally. "You see our ship losses and you think we're desperate, throwing away irreplaceable assets in futile gestures.
But that's not what's happening at all."
The images shifted to show production statistics that made Vexthera's compound eyes widen. Humanity wasn't just building ships to replace their losses, they were building them faster than they could destroy them.
"Every ship we lose teaches us something new about how to fight the hegemony," Chen explained.
"Every engagement provides data that we use to design better weapons, better tactics, better ways to turn our deaths into your defeats. And we're manufacturing the tools to apply those lessons faster than you can adapt to them."
High Admiral Vortex stood, his massive frame towering over the other delegates.
"Human, you speak of manufacturing efficiency as if it were a military strategy.
No civilized species treats warfare as an industrial process."
Chen turned to face the hegemony commander, and Vexthera saw something in the human's expression that made her thorax constrict with primitive warning signals.
"High Admiral, you're absolutely right. No civilized species does treat warfare as an industrial process.
But, then, you've never fought a species that spent most of its evolutionary history trying to kill itself."
New images filled the chamber.
Historical records from Earth's past, showing conflicts that had raged across entire continents with casualty figures that made galactic wars look like minor disputes. "You see, we have a saying on Earth, humans are the only species that can look at a perfectly good planet and decide it needs more explosions. We've been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years.
We just never had worthy opponents before." The chamber erupted in shocked chittering and harmonic resonances as delegates struggled to process what they were hearing.
Chen waited for the noise to subside before continuing.
"You want to know what the real problem is?
It's not that we're willing to sacrifice ships and crews to achieve our objectives.
Every species does that to some degree. The problem is that we're good at it."
He gestured again, and the display showed tactical analyses from the recent engagements. Ship designs that incorporated lessons learned from previous battles. Weapons configurations that had been optimized based on captured hegemony technology. Attack patterns that had evolved through dozens of iterations. "We're not just throwing ourselves at you hoping something will work. We're systematically learning how to destroy you, and we're getting better at it with every engagement. At this rate, we estimate that within 6 months we'll have tactical parity with hegemony forces. Within a year, we'll have superiority."
"Impossible," Vortex snarled. "Our technology is centuries ahead of yours."
"Our fleets have dominated the galaxy for it. Your fleets have dominated civilized opposition," Chen interrupted. "Opponents who followed established rules of engagement, who weighed costs against benefits, who tried to minimize casualties and preserve resources.
You've never fought anyone who was willing to turn their entire civilization into a weapon."
The words hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Vexthera found herself studying the faces of her fellow delegates, seeing her own growing horror reflected in their expressions.
The human wasn't just describing military tactics.
He was describing a fundamental shift in how warfare itself was conducted.
"What do you want?" Supreme Counselor Thranks asked quietly.
"Very simple," Chen replied.
"Complete cessation of all hegemony sterilization operations.
Immediate withdrawal from occupied systems where genocide is being conducted. And war crimes tribunals for every commander who has participated in civilian massacres."
The demands were so sweeping that they took several seconds to fully register.
When they did, Vortex let out a roar of rage that shook the chamber's foundations.
"Preposterous.
The hegemony will never submit to demands from a primitive species that." "High Admiral," Chen said conversationally, "let me explain something to you.
This isn't a negotiation. This isn't diplomacy. This is me telling you what's going to happen." He activated new displays showing ship movements throughout the galaxy.
Human fleets, no longer operating as small raiding forces, but moving in coordinated battle groups that were converging on major hegemony installations.
3 hours ago, our forces began what we're calling Operation Final Lesson. Every hegemony military installation, every occupied system, every asset you've used to conduct genocide is now under attack.
The scale of what he was describing hit the chamber like a physical blow.
This wasn't a series of raids or tactical strikes.
This was total war, conducted simultaneously across hundreds of systems.
You're talking about galactic warfare, Counselor Meridian whispered, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. The casualties will number in the billions.
Yes, Chen agreed.
But, here's the difference.
Our casualties will be volunteers who chose to fight to protect innocent lives. Yours will be soldiers who followed orders to commit genocide.
Vexthera watched High Admiral Vorthex's expression change as reports began flowing in from across the galaxy. Hegemony installations under attack. Fleets engaged in desperate defensive battles.
The carefully constructed military machine that had dominated galactic politics for centuries beginning to fracture under assault from an enemy that fought by completely different rules.
This is madness, Vorthex said, but his voice lacked its usual commanding authority. Even if you succeed, you'll have destabilized the entire galactic order. Chaos will follow. Trade routes will collapse.
Entire civilizations will be free to exist without fearing that you'll sterilize them if they displease you, Chen finished.
Yes, that's exactly what we're hoping for.
The communications array in the chamber began receiving priority transmissions from across the galaxy. Battle reports, casualty figures, tactical updates that painted a picture of warfare on a scale that hadn't been seen since the Great Expansion Wars millennia earlier. But there was something else in the reports that made Vexthera's trained military mind focus with growing amazement. The humans weren't just attacking hegemony forces, they were coordinating with local defense fleets, providing tactical support to besieged worlds, even evacuating civilian populations from contested systems.
You're not just fighting a war, she realized aloud. You're conducting a liberation campaign. Chen nodded grimly.
Commander, the galaxy has been afraid of the hegemony for so long that most species have forgotten what it means to fight back.
We're reminding them. New reports were coming in now that showed non-human fleets joining human attacks on hegemony positions.
Species that had been neutral for centuries were suddenly providing intelligence, resources, even ships to support what was being called the Liberation Fleet.
This cannot be allowed to continue, Vorthex said desperately. The stability of galactic civilization depends on the ability of strong species to slaughter weak ones without consequences? Chen asked. High Admiral, that's not civilization. That's just successful bullying.
The human turned to address the entire assembly, his voice carrying a weight that commanded attention despite his species' newcomer status in galactic affairs. Every being in this chamber represents a civilization that has, at some point, accommodated hegemony demands rather than risk total destruction.
You've all made the calculation that some level of injustice was acceptable if it meant preserving stability. He paused, letting that sink in.
Humanity never had that option. By the time we reached the stars, the hegemony had already marked us for elimination. So we never learned to calculate acceptable levels of injustice.
We only learned to fight.
The final reports were coming in now, and they painted a picture that would reshape galactic politics forever. In less than 24 hours, humanity had conducted coordinated attacks on over 300 hegemony installations. The casualties were staggering on both sides, but the strategic impact was undeniable. The hegemony's ability to project power across the galaxy had been crippled. The question now, Chen continued, is what kind of galaxy we build from here. You can try to maintain the old order, where might makes right and the strong prey on the weak. Or you can help us build something better. He turned specifically to High Admiral Vorthex, who sat in stunned silence as his aides whispered increasingly desperate reports in his ears.
High Admiral, your choice is simple.
End the genocide campaigns, stand trial for your war crimes, and help us establish a galactic order based on protecting the innocent rather than slaughtering them. Or we finish this war the way we've been fighting it, by turning your entire military machine into scrap metal.
The silence that followed was so complete that Vexthera could hear the chamber's atmospheric processors cycling. Every delegate was staring at the human, trying to process what they had just witnessed.
Not just the end of a war, but the birth of a completely new form of galactic politics.
Finally, Vortex spoke, his voice hollow and defeated. What guarantee do we have that humanity won't simply become the next galactic hegemon? That you won't use your military superiority to impose your own will on weaker species?
Chen's smile was tired but genuine.
Hi Admiral, you're thinking about this wrong again. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to make sure that no one else can rule it through fear and genocide.
He began walking toward the chamber's exit, then paused at the threshold.
Besides, there's something you should understand about humans.
We're much better at breaking things than we are at building them. But we're very, very good at making sure that the things that need to be broken stay broken. As the human disappeared into the corridor beyond, Vexthera found herself staring at the tactical displays that showed the hegemony's military power scattered and broken across hundreds of systems. For the first time in her career, the galaxy felt genuinely free. And, for the first time since meeting humanity, she understood exactly why they terrified everyone who encountered them.
They didn't fight to win. They didn't fight to conquer. They didn't even fight to survive. They fought to end fights. Forever. And they were very, very good at it.